one person's body and two lives. And the old view was that it's genetics, that there is something wrong with, something different about Black people's bodies that is causing infant and maternal mortality, and as well as other poor health outcomes, including things like high blood pressure and heart disease. All right, so believe me, when it's sort of like, oh, there are physiological differences, that almost 100% means is a proxy for physiological inferiority. And that comes from these old myths about Black bodies come from enslavement. I was fortunate enough to be plucked out of my home office and put onto the 1619 Project, where I looked at medical myths that have endured since the 1700s really, 1600s, since 1619. And look at the through line to today. How are those medical myths still affecting healthcare treatment in the system? Okay, so I looked at two myths. The first was that Black people have inferior lung function, so lower lung function. And then the myth was so intense that it was sort of like, oh, actually enslavement helps enslaved people because they get to work the lungs, working outside. And I'm like you, reading this stuff, consuming it, and thinking, this is such quackery, how could this be? But this was so foundational in order to justify enslavement, and to keep people enslaved, to keep people working, and to keep people from not feeling guilty about it, or not feeling anything about it, except for as a money-making venture, as capitalism. All right, I traced it back. And this may have started with Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was not a doctor, not a scientist, but was widely respected. And physicians at the time, Southern physicians and scientists, picked up on his ideas that were written in the state of, Notes on the State of Virginia in 1787. And when you read this, there are so many myths that he puts in. Most of it is not about this, but there's this section that talks about Black people's inferiority. Obviously, the irony should not be lost on any of us that he had a Black family, but he was still writing about these myths. Doctors like Dr. Samuel Cartwright, who was a physician in Louisiana in the 1850s, late 1700s, 1850s, latched on to these ideas and codified them using science. One of, some of the stuff that he believed in, the inferiorities, were that Black people possessed smaller brains, had more sensitive skin, overdeveloped nervous systems, as well as weakened lungs. And the other thing he did was he had this disease he created called drapetomania. And it was a mental illness that enslaved Black people got that caused them to escape. So ridiculous. However, he made presentations in medical society meetings. He was published in medical journals. He was educated in what is now Tulane, and that's where he was. And so even though he seems like the height of quackery, he was respected and he was an expert on Negro diseases. So I don't even know where to put the quotes, expert Negro diseases. And so he was widely believed. And many of these Southern doctors and scientists that were pushing these myths were enslavers themselves, so they owned people. All right, so what happened to this man is he was using a spirometer. So he was using it, and he kind of sort of helped get it into wide use back in his day. And in that spirometer, it made the assumption that Black people have 10 to 15% lower lung function. The through line to today, that's why I have that book up there, it's a really lovely book by a Brown University professor. And it talks about how the spirometer, even the current spirometer, has baked into it a lung function correction that assumes a 10 to 15% deficit for Black people. And I was thinking about this, I was like, how does it work? And I was asking Dr. Mary Bassett, who is our health commissioner in New York. I just spoke to her and I was like, okay, I'm talking about this barometer, I don't get how it works. She said, well, when I was practicing, what we did was when you have a black patient, you flip a switch. You have a little switch. Some of you probably know about this. And I started thinking about it because I had a lung function test about 4 years ago. I had something, and I was trying to see, my doctor was trying to see if was getting better. So I had a lung function test, and I thought, I wonder if she gave me the race correction, which would have been a mess because I am from the state of Colorado. I grew up in the Mile High City. I am the Serena Williams of lung function. My lung capacity is really good. So then I thought, just because I walked in the room as a black person, I got this correction that didn't consider my individual history. All right, so the second myth, and more sinister, is that black people have superhuman pain tolerance. This, again, came from slavery, and it was used to justify unimaginable treatment and cruelty, hard work, beating, whipping, lynching. I looked at, for the 1619 Project, I looked at this book, Slave Life in Georgia by John Brown. John Brown was one of the rare enslaved people who managed to escape, thank God, because he had been lent out to a physician on another plantation, and that physician was trying to measure heat tolerance and did really torturous experiments around this heat tolerance, and also dug into his skin to see if his pain tolerance and the thickness of his skin, to see if black skin was thicker than white skin. And luckily for him, he got to tell his story. His story is beautiful, and it's, the rare slave narrative. It's really lovely done. But I remember that. I was like, that doctor, Dr. Hamilton was his name. He was a physician on a plantation in Georgia doing those experiments. This is J. Marion Sims. Probably you've heard of him. He's the so-called father of modern gynecology. He practiced mostly in Montgomery, Alabama, on enslaved people. He was trying to create a remedy for fistula. And this is a famous painting. I don't even like to look at it, and because I know actually this isn't the reality. These are the enslaved women that he operated on, Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, without anesthesia to, perfect this surgery. And certainly she would not have been dressed. She would have been naked. And also those two other women were not hiding behind that sheet, they were holding her down because she was in such pain. And somebody was asking me, he was like, how did you find out about J. Marion Sims and this specificity of what he was doing? I said, oh, he wrote about it in his biography, My Life. He wrote about it openly because this myth was so widespread that black people did not have the same kind of feeling around pain that he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. So that's why he wrote about it openly in his book. All right, here's the through line. This is a 2016 kind of well-known survey out of the University of Virginia that asked, I think it was 222 white medical students, these questions about pain, about the thickness of the skin, about these kind of questions that are not true. There aren't these kinds of black-white differences, but ask, the first group is general people, then it's first, second, third year, I think, medical students and residents. 40% of them believed at least one myth. This is 2016. Then I thought, let me see what else. There's a lot of work around this kind of pain, tolerance myth. So this is more recent. This is in 2019. And this looked at C-sections. It found that even when black women complained of pain more, they were observed less and received pain management less for C-section. C-section is a major surgery. So that's quite recent. All right. So finally, this myth around the genetic differences, specifically around infant mortality, was dashed in 2007. And this is a really interesting study out of the University of Illinois at Chicago. Two perinatologists looked at tens of thousands of birth certificates in 4 demographics of people. Black American women, Black women from the Caribbean and some of the poorest African countries, white immigrants from Europe, and then white Americans. they looked at the birth weights and they found that 3 groups had basically normal birth weights as their demographic. So that was everyone except the Black American women, even the Black women from the poorest countries of Europe and Africa and the Caribbean. So Black women as a group had significantly lower birth rates. So then they looked at the next generation of those birth certificates. And what they found was white American women had the same basic birth weights. The immigrant women in their next generation, their babies were slightly bigger. The Black women still had small babies, but then the Black American, immigrant women, their babies' weight had lowered to match the Black American women. So I got into this argument I was talking about this, and somebody said, well, that makes sense because the African women were probably coming here and eating McDonald's and eating bad things. So I was like, okay, that is not what it was. And the reason this study jumped out at me was because the researcher, like y'all, when you do your studies, you're kind of dry, you keep it really serious, especially if it's in the New England Journal of Medicine. But this was like really blunt. It was like something about being Black in America is bad for your body and bad for your baby. And that thing is racism. So that is pretty blunt for, for a scientist to be saying. And so I was really, really attracted to this. So that's the first thing in genetics, is to blame for poor health outcomes, especially in infant mortality. All right, the second thing, if it's not genetics, something wrong with the Black body, it's something wrong with Black culture and people. And I was at Northwestern earlier this week, and I was talking about these studies, and then somebody raised their hand and they said, well, couldn't that, when you're looking at that study of the 4 groups, couldn't it have been that the Black women just didn't get prenatal care? They just didn't either get it, have access to it, or understand it. The guy didn't know he was sitting next to Dr. David, who did this study from the previous slide. So I said, Dr. David, how much does prenatal care? And this question, he was like, we match prenatal care. That wasn't the thing. But I think automatically it goes to, if it's not something wrong with your body, it's something wrong with your culture or you. You don't care, or you're not trying hard enough. So this is a slide, I got it from Dr. David Williams from Harvard School of Public Health. And it just shows, it says that when you ask people, how could Blacks do better in all areas, including wealth, health, all the things, it's like if only they tried harder. And so if that is embedded, that notion that Black people are just not making enough effort, and that's why we have poor health outcomes and other poor outcomes in the US, that is a problem. Certainly everybody should do better. Everybody should be like Michelle Obama, okay? Have those big arms, big strong arms, and be doing Let's Move and dancing at the White House. Clearly I'm living the past. Everybody should take care of their baby. But something else is going on here. So I'm gonna go back to my 1619 project work and say, where does the assumption that we're doing something wrong come from? Again, it traced back to slavery. The idea, the stereotypes that we are as a group are lazy, don't like to work, not very intelligent, made for enslavement because of our Black skin and Black bodies, just to justify free labor and building up the economy of this country, especially in the South, is old. And it has stuck in the systems of America, including the healthcare system. All right, so here's one of the stereotyped Black people are angry, violent, dangerous, etc. Black intelligence. This is the price. This is the price. This is New York City. Those children, those 5 kids were accused of raping the Central Park jogger. All of the headlines, I was in New York at that time, were like this, like animalistic, angry, marauding. These were children. They went to jail, they went to prison. Once DNA testing came about and they could prove they were exonerated with their DNA evidence. This is the price of the stereotype. when the stereotype involves both racism and sexism, what happens to women, that black women folk are angry and hypersexual, you get this. Any black woman not smiling is angry. My son said to me today, you need to work on your resting bee face. I was like, are you saying that I look angry? I'm not smiling? And I showed him this. I'm like, stop it. I'm just serious. All right, but then this too. This is, Serena Williams has taken so many hits. She's fierce. She's a champion. She is maybe the greatest athlete alive. But this is a cartoon that came out around, not this US Open, but a few US Opens ago, in a newspaper, that this is her, if she didn't get a call that went her way. That is a stereotype. This is the price of her stereotype, and others is that when she was just trying to have a baby 5 years ago, she knew what was wrong. She knew that she was prone to blood clots. She was taking medication for it. She went off the medication during birth. She was at a really good hospital. She also was with her husband. Both of them, have the GNP of a country. So these people are wealthy, but she still, when she tried to express her legitimate concerns around in the labor and delivery room and after, she was shut down and ended up having a near tragedy, near crisis. Her baby's fine, she's 5 years old, she's super cute, but that should never happen. But if that stereotype of her and others is floating around that she's angry and violent and maybe doesn't know what she's talking about, that is the price. This is the price. This is Dr. Susan Moore, who was a physician in Indiana. She was a doctor. She went into the hospital with COVID in, I think, 2020, I think it was 2021. She went into the hospital with COVID. She knew what was wrong. She was in pain, could not get, the doctor didn't at first give her kind of pain management. She also knew what she should have with COVID. They weren't listening to her. They shut her down. She left that hospital and then she died not long after. What she did was she took, this is a screenshot from her Facebook video. She posted a picture of herself from her hospital bed and talked about what was going on with her. And the refrain was, this is how black people get killed. That's what she said on her video. This is how black people get killed. When they did an investigation of the hospital, what they found was that part of the reason they said it, part of the reason that she didn't get the proper care was because some of the staff was intimidated by her medical knowledge in the system where she worked. So that something is going on here. This is the price of the stereotype. Sometimes trained medical providers aren't taken seriously. This is there was a hashtag that was, this is what a doctor looks like. After there was a black woman physician on a flight, a passenger got sick, she tried to give help, give aid, she's a physician, and then the airline staff didn't believe she was a physician and took her off vacation. So that started a hashtag of people of color, black people, posting pictures of physicians, posting pictures of themselves with the hashtag, this is what a doctor looks like. And finally, this is the price of that stereotype. Okay, so now, I don't want to make it seem like I'm some know-it-all and I know everything and I've always known everything. I think when I first started looking at this as a young editor at Essence Magazine, later as an editor at the New York Times, and now as a magazine writer at the Times Magazine, I thought that race was a risk factor for poor health outcomes in black people. That's what we were always told. That's what we understood. But now, the newer, more accurate way to say it is it's not race that's a risk factor for poor health outcomes. Remember, birth to death, it's racism. It's it's discrimination and ill treatment that's causing these health outcomes. All right, so here are the three things that I write about in my book. One, that's something about being black in America, like Dr. David said, is bad for the body of a black person or anybody who is experiencing discrimination. Centuries of sanctioned discrimination in the country has created black Black communities and other communities of color that are less healthy. And then finally, proven and evidence-based racism in the medical system itself. Anti-Black racism is causing part of the problem. All right. Who has heard of the term weathering? Okay, that's good. Know this term. Also know that it was coined by Dr. Arlene Geronimus, who is a professor at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. She has a book coming out. You can invite her here next year, but she's brilliant. It's coming out in March. She toiled years with this theory and got no traction until the last couple of years. But her theory is that the lived experience of being Black, or anybody that's ill-treated, weathers the body. It wears it away. You're going into fight or flight much too often. So the systems of your body are lighting up time and time again, building up the allostatic load and leading to poor health outcomes. And she called it weathering because it's twofold. It's the way a storm weathers a house. It knocks off the shingles, it chips the paint, it breaks the windows. But the flip side is, if people weather the storm, we are still here despite the coping against sort of everyday insults and larger insults and discrimination. We are weathering this storm in America. So I like that. I have a personal, I think about it personally. That's my daughter, Callie, who is 26. And when I got pregnant with her, I was the editor of Essence Magazine. I was the poster child for good health. I did every single thing right. I was eating right, I was in public, I was just trying to be a health show off. And so when I got pregnant, I was like, oh, this is gonna be great. Obviously, this is a petri dish of one person, but I was super surprised when my doctor told me, put me on bed rest, and sent me to a specialist. And the specialist said to me, okay, we need to go, I see you have inter-uterine growth restriction, so we need to talk about your lifestyle. I was like, okay. They go through all these bad foods. I was like, I eat none of those, okay? Are you drinking? I was like, while pregnant? No. And then it was sort of like, what illicit drugs do you use? And went through every single one. And then it was sort of like, and what about crack cocaine? Not just cocaine, but crack cocaine. Me, I'm the health editor of Essence. I'm not using crack cocaine while pregnant. But then I'm like, what is wrong with me? So I have Callie, and she's tiny, she's low birth weight, almost preterm, but we squeezed her out a day. I was like, please, let's not make her preterm. Can I just be induced tomorrow? And she was 4 pounds, 13 ounces. She's fine now, she's athletic and healthy, and she looks like that. However, once I learned the term weathering, I thought, is that what happened to me? So it was personal. The second, the social determinants of health, don't know what that is, it's so wonky when I'm teaching to my students. It really just means that the communities that we live in often lack healthy food, safe exercise and green space, and certainly, and safety in general, and also are subject to pollution. So Black people are 75% more likely to live near a polluting facility, a refinery, a toxic dump, some kind of, place where the air isn't clean, the water isn't clean, the earth itself isn't clean. So we're just more likely to live in those communities that lack health, and including healthcare facilities. This is also personal to me. My mother is from Chicago. My grandparents came up from Mississippi to Chicago. That's them in that picture with me sitting on my grandfather's lap. They are from 2 different parts of Mississippi, and during the Great Migration, they came to Chicago as a kind of promised land. They lived in that building, which my great aunts and uncle bought, and then my grandfather bought his own building. My mom and I looked at the demographics, this is 2020, demographics of Chicago, and Inglewood, where my family settled, people lived to age 60. 9 miles north in Streeterville. I was just there, and I stayed in Streeterville. I was like, I can't believe I'm staying in the rich part, even though my ancestors are from the poor part. So it's the largest gap in life expectancy, 30 years and 9 miles. And when I looked into it, I knew about redlining. I knew about that. I knew it was hard for my grandparents and all the Black folks that came up from the South to buy a home. But then I didn't know about contract buying. So contract buying meant that Black people were not allowed to get a mortgage. So you had to buy a home on a contract. A home obviously is your biggest asset, your most important asset. And I happened to ask my mom, how did grandfather buy that building? And she said, I don't know, I remember it was on some kind of contract, and he was always terrified of losing it. And I was interviewing a friend who started a Black men's clinic in that community. And I checked in with him and said, how's the clinic going? And he said, I shut it down. He said, healthcare, a clinic is not enough. It won't help. Everything is crumbling around this clinic, and people coming here that they don't want, they don't need the clinic, they need jobs. They need to be healthy before they get sick. They need to have access, they need food, they need better schools. And he stopped the clinic and started doing wealth building. He's a physician. And I thought of that because I thought, whoa, because I have been so impressed with that clinic, but that clinic wasn't enough in this community that's suffered from so many years of erasure. All right, the third thing is discrimination in the healthcare system itself. I was on a panel a couple of days ago and somebody goes, well, I know it exists, but we just need more evidence. And I'm like, no, we don't. We do not need any more evidence. If you don't believe it, then look at unequal treatment is 20 years old this year. It came out in 2002 and it was published in 2003. And it was a list of 483 other studies that looked at, without a shadow of a doubt, it's gold standard, it's National Academy of Sciences, so looked at 483 studies. So I looked through almost all of them, and the one that struck out was about amputation. And it looked at two groups of Black patients, white patients who had equal severity of diabetes and also equal access to health care. But still, the Black patients were much more likely to get an amputation, even when those other parts were equal. And certainly you can look at it, you can pick at it, you can think about it, and it was really only one of the 483 studies, but that stuck with me. So the decision to have your leg cut off, and there's something poking around about race involved in that decision making, that scared me. And this too is personal to me. That is my father, who I guess in 1999 went into the hospital. He was very sick. He was living in Denver. I was in New York, working with the New York Times. My mother called me and she said, you need to come home now. You need to get on a plane, you put on a business suit, and you put your New York Times business cards in your pocket. I'll meet you at the airport. She picks me up. She's dressed like a corporate executive. And I'm like, what is happening here? And she said, your father is really, really ill, and they're treating him like an N-word. And I was like, uh-oh, what? So we go to the hospital where he is. My father was trained as a bacteriologist. He was impeccably dressed, well-groomed, sort of like a good sense of humor, but on the mild-mannered side, really polite, courtly. He was a mess. He was wearing this dirty gown. His hair was all over the place in a way I know he never had that. And then worse, he was restrained to the bed. And he was really, really upset. And I leaned down and he said, get me out of here. So my mom and I went home. We got pictures of him in his nice clothes before he was sick. He was a veteran. He had a Silver Star from serving in the military. We brought that. We brought his college degree and told him about him to say, he will understand, but he's upset, he's scared. Why are you restraining him to the bed? Why are you talking to him this way? We needed to make them see him, not his disease and his anger and his fear and his upsetness, but to see him as who he really was. He died like 6 months later, but I just thought, why did we have to play that respectability card and go in those business suits and those cards and bring those medals? He should have just been treated like anyone else. All right, don't go down, don't get depressed. I'm going to bring you back. There's some good stuff. This is Dr. Mary Bassett, who I mentioned. I was really excited in 2015 when she had her New England Journal of Medicine essay, which is now quite famous, and she talked about the importance of, as a physician herself, to really fight anti-Black racism, because that is, it's not enough to just care for patients, you have to also do that part. And it was really important. She was our head of our Department of Health in New York City. She instituted anti-racism training for all 7,000 employees of our Department of Health. She also looked at the health policies to make sure they were equitable, and that was a really impressive feat. She is now our state health commissioner, so it'll be interesting to see, as of recently, so it'll be interesting to see what she does for the state. But that was a really important mandate because it came from the top down. All right, this is in California, where several years ago they had the same kind of maternal mortality statistics as the rest of the country. So they looked to say, we are going to go into the hospital systems and make sure that if there's an emergency C-section, if there's preeclampsia or hemorrhage, we're going to make sure all the tools are in one place that you need in that emergency. Everybody knows what to do, all the protocols. Then they studied it over, I think, about a 6-year, maybe longer period, and they found out that making those changes at the hospital level reduced the maternal mortality rate in that state by 55%. It was a success, except the racial disparity didn't change, because Black women were still 3 to 4 times more likely to die or almost die, because it mostly benefited white women and to some extent Latinx women. So what they did is in the end of 2019, they mandated that anybody who works with a person, pregnancy, during labor and delivery and the time after, must go through some kind of anti-implicit bias training. So I don't know if that's enough, but it's something. And I went to Louisiana, where I had been stationed to study maternal mortality, and they were following California, but they didn't make the mistake of not including the anti-racism training the first round. So they said, we learned from their mistakes. And it's interesting to see what's going on. It's hard to measure it now because this happened so close around, around the pandemic, but I'm keeping an eye on them because I think it's important. Medical students, are you part of White Coats for Black Lives? And others. Medical students and physicians, yay, this is a good group. I really like what they're doing. I really respect. I think it's hard to go to medical school and also, obviously, and also be doing this activism, but it's important. This is a group, anybody heard of Institute for Healing and Justice in Medicine? Okay, good. Another wonderful group of students who are getting their MPH from Berkeley and their medical degree from UC San Francisco. And they created this, this sort of manifesto, they call it a white paper, I think it's a manifesto, around abolishing biological race in medicine. And one of their mandates is to remove race from the kidney function test, which is very interesting. And I've sat in a couple of their meetings, and I think it's a really exciting group to follow. Activism works. This is New York City, where we had that statue of J. Marion Sims right across from National Academy of Medicine in Central Park. Some activists got out there on that kind of those gowns stained with paint and protested until the statue was moved. It was removed. It's gone. I don't know where J. Marion Sims is. He didn't deserve a statue. His moment's over. All right, but this is Montgomery, Alabama, where the statue's still there. Okay, the statue's there. The woman with the red glasses is Michelle Browder. She is a reproductive justice warrior and artist. She made a sort of sculpture garden of Antarctica, Betsy, and Lucy. So when you go to the Legacy Museum and Memorial, you can just hop over to her sculpture garden and see these beautiful works of art. And I'm really excited by her work. She's organizing a reproductive justice conference in February, and it'll be right there. And then finally, this is my class. I'm teaching pre-med students about these issues this semester. I'm sure they'd be mortified if they do, I'm always showing their photo. But I'm really excited to see their energy, their thirst for knowledge, their real engagement with these issues. And I see them wanting to be, do better. And I'm excited by this. So I'm going to leave you with that really positive image, and thank you. I'd love to take your questions.